All right, welcome to East Lansing City Council meeting, regular council meeting, December 7th, 2021. I'll look for a roll call.
Councilmember Babcock. Here. Councilmember Brookover.
Here.
Councilmember Watson. Mayor Pro Tem Gregg.
Here.
Mayor Bacon.
Present. Councilperson Watson's en route. She'll be here post haste. Second, I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move approval of the agenda. Second?
Motion to approve, Mayor Pro Tem Gregg. Second, Councilperson Babcock. I'll look for a vote. All in favor of approval of the agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Agenda is approved. I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes for regular council meeting, November 23rd, 2021.
So moved.
So, look for a second.
Second?
Moved by Councilperson Brookover, second by Councilperson Babcock. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of the minutes. All written communication received by council or posted in online agenda packet. That's all written communications received before 4 p.m. Next, if you please fill out the blue card. We'll go next to communications from the audience in person. Under the current rules, you're allowed 5 minutes for comment. There'll be a timer up on the screen. Please feel free to stay within the 5-minute threshold. Thank you. If you'd like to proceed, you can go ahead and then we'll get the card after.
Are you talking to me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. Can you hear me with this?
Sure can.
Okay, thank you. For the record, my name is Linda Appling, and I reside in your sister city. Many, many moons ago, I used to live in this city, but I graduated and moved out. Today, I am here to talk about Secure Michigan Vote, the ballot initiative that has been introduced essentially by Republicans. And what I'm asking is, as the elected representatives of the people of East Lansing, I am asking that you speak out against the Secure Michigan Vote ballot initiative. You have a right and obligation to inform your voters of the negative effect this initiative will have on the ability to vote in Michigan. Amongst its most troublesome problems are a prohibition of receiving any kind of aid. This includes rental space used for polling locations, which also includes churches. Eliminating the ability of groups such as the NAACP or Voters Not Politicians to monitor elections. And it will make it harder to vote by absentee ballot. This will have a negative effect upon those who are older and who prefer not to go to the polls and to vote absentee. They may have to submit a copy of their driver's license or personal ID, and you have no idea what will happen to that information. It also reduces or eliminates drop boxes. You should tell the people of East Lansing not to sign the Secure Michigan Vote ballot petitions. This should be placed on your web pages and or Facebook pages. This is important since you have a number of new people coming to live in East Lansing. Those seeking signatures on the Secure Michigan ballot will lie. They will deceive people to get their signature. Remember, this petition will not be put on the ballot. There will be no voting on this particular petition, and this is due to a quirk in terms of the Michigan Constitution. Once the necessary signatures are obtained, and I think that's 300,000 plus, The legislature will pass the bills, and they will become law. The governor will not be able to veto them. Once again, I say use your voice. You have a constitutional right to speak up, and in my opinion, an obligation. You are the elected representatives of the people of this city. Please use that. Tell them the truth about this initiative. Please exercise your leadership. And in case you're wondering, I've already made the same speech for the Lansing City Council.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sarah Reckow. I'm an East Lansing resident, and I'm also a member of the city's Parks and Recreation Board. I'm here tonight to talk about COVID. The state of Michigan is entering the winter months with some of the highest COVID-19 levels in the United States. And I'm grateful that the city of East Lansing is continuing to offer public services and access to the indoor facilities that we all value and appreciate, like the Hannah Community Center where we are this evening. I strongly support the continuation of these activities and public services and efforts like the mask mandate that we have. However, I also urge the city to take action that will enable safer access and more community resilience against the spread of COVID-19 as we continue to deal with the pandemic. It is ongoing. We're dealing with new variants. Prior to the start of this academic year, Michigan State adopted a vaccine mandate for all students and employees. I'm an employee at Michigan State University, and this summer, I, along with some colleagues, started a petition urging MSU to adopt that vaccine mandate. This policy has been very successful. There's over 90% self-reported vaccination among MSU students, faculty, and staff. And on a campus with well over 50,000 people, only 2 staff were fired and only 16 students were suspended for refusing the vaccine. Mandates can be extremely effective as a tool to persuade reluctant individuals to be vaccinated and to increase the levels of safety and protection for the entire community. I am enormously grateful that that has been the policy at our university, and you can see it in the numbers in November as the state has experienced an exponential growth in cases that has not been the case at MSU. The city of East Lansing should follow the lead of MSU by adopting vaccination requirements. We should not wait for pending litigation related to the federal vaccine mandate rule from OSHA. And the Biden administration has urged employers not to wait. Cities have the power to act on this issue. City vaccine mandates can be very effective. In fact, the city of Ann Arbor here in Michigan has an employee vaccine mandate. They achieved 96% compliance ahead of their deadline. So I'd ask the city of East Lansing to consider the following steps. One would be adopting a vaccine mandate for all city employees. That could consider including something like medical exemptions for folks who want to instead test weekly rather than have the mandate. I think another, if we want to advance a further step on community resilience on this topic, as we already have adopted mask mandates for indoor facilities, could be to request self-reported confirmation of vaccination for visitors to cities' indoor facilities for those who are over 16 or evidence of a recent negative test. I do think that common sense steps that include vaccination mandate would aid our city and our community in addressing this recent surge of cases. It would protect our most vulnerable residents. And it will make us more resilient as we go on with further months of dealing with this issue. I can also say that the Parks and Recreation Commission is planning to discuss some of these issues at our next meeting next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Any more in-person comment? Emily, is there any comment in the virtual queue?
Caller with the phone number ending in 437, you are now permitted to address council.
Hi, my name is My name is Renee. I'm just wondering why I'm not seeing a live stream of the video tonight. Hello?
Same setup we have typically, the city manager, George Lohanis. I'm not sure where you're looking for it, but the same setup is normal. So we'll check to see if there's anything going wrong from our side to see if we can fix it.
Oh, okay. I
Are you-
appreciate that. Yeah.
Are you
I've looked
watching on
quite a few
TV?
times.
Are you watching on
No, it's on the laptop.
on the laptop?
I just checked and we're up and running, so.
It appears to be running, so I'm not sure if it's a problem with your computer or browser, but staff here report that it's running on the browser.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily? Emily, is there other callers in the virtual queue?
The next caller is East Lansing Info. You are now permitted to address council.
Hi, this is Alice Dreger. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to confirm with the caller, just said that the live feed is not working on the internet. So that's why I'm on Zoom as well, because I couldn't get the live feed to work. Also, I would appreciate if on the item in which you're going to go into closed session, you please tell us which collective bargaining agreement. It would be helpful in terms of transparency to at the least know which bargaining agreement we're talking about. That's all. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Emily, next caller in the queue?
Those are all the callers on the line.
Next up, communication from the mayor and council members.
Yeah, several people here in the audience are pulling up the browser on our phones and laptops that are connected to the city Wi-Fi here, and everyone so far in the room has been able to pull up the live feed, so I don't know what is going on, and because it's not showing up on our end, I'm not sure that we'll be able to fix it, but we are looking at it. That sort of derailed my train of thought in terms of what I might have been going to say.
I'll come back to
So
you.
come back to me, I guess, yeah, thanks.
Councilperson Brookover?
Nothing, thank you, Mayor.
Councilperson Babcock?
Thank you. Most people know I'm not the most techie person, but I received a message suggesting that if people are having a hard time seeing the feed, that they go to YouTube. You might want to give that a try. I don't know. So I have a couple things. First off, today is the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor Day, and that was my grandparents' generation. There are very few people with us who have a strong memory of that day, but my grandparents' generation did. And through the pandemic, and particularly Dr. Recklow's comments about vaccinations and masks, I've been thinking about that generation a lot in the past year and a half. And every time I think about my grandparents and their peers, part of the story I always overlooked was that they were born into a pandemic era or were very small children during the pandemic, flu pandemic of 1918. My grandparents all would have been toddlers or newborns during that. And certainly came into the world with a lot of vulnerability and a lot of stress. And one of my grandmothers suffered from terrible rickets because she lived on the south side of Chicago during the school year, and during summers would come up to Nashville, Michigan, yes, there really is one, and she would get milk from the cows from the farm, and of course that had health consequences. You know, the childhood and teenage years and even early adult years for that generation was spent largely in a Great Depression. The Great Depression reached the rural areas before it reached the city, and there was no social safety net. That really didn't kick in until 1938 or so, by the time Roosevelt got past the Supreme Court. And then came Pearl Harbor Day. And if you were like my grandparents, you were, in one case, a fairly newlywed couple, a 4-year-old son and a 6-month-old son, and then my grandfather up and joined the Army. And they really didn't know anything like security until their 30th birthdays or beyond. You know, everything had been hand to mouth. Everything had been very much in doubt. And when we think about the challenges we face with the pandemic, we realize that people are suffering, but we also have a lot to be thankful for. So I will just put this in the words of my rather feisty Irish grandmother: just get the damn shot and wear the mask already. So moving on to a more professional. I did notice that we have items about fraternities and sororities up at the Planning Commission tomorrow. We're talking about expanding or relocating 3 fraternities. If people are interested in that, they might want to tune in. I'm not sure what the exact details are. It was called to my attention. And then I have some questions. Yes, I would like to know whether we have any updates on the Country Mill case or the Mike Nichols case for FOIA, whether we ever received a quarterly update from our lobbyist, which we've asked for, and now is when the decisions are being made in the late night hours at the Capitol. And also, yes, which union contract are we going to discuss tonight? That would be nice for the council to know as well.
I can answer that. It's the Patrol Officers Association, POAM. It's actually called the Capital Labor Council. So it's patrol officers, a group of police officers, non-command, and jail service officers.
Thank you.
And then the other group is the IFF, our firefighters, which is a group of all firefighters up through deputy chief, all the way to our first firefighter, our entry-level firefighter position. So those are the 2 contracts we'll be discussing.
Okay. And do we have any updates on particularly Country Mill? We haven't heard about that in a while.
The city attorney may be able to answer that during her time. She's on the phone. And on the city attorney's report, or if she's available now to speak to it.
Certainly. So the Country Mill lawsuit is not handled by our firm. It is Insurance Counsel, and they report directly to city staff. So they have not communicated any update on that lawsuit to our office. I can update you on the Nichols FOIA lawsuit, though. That is set for a motion hearing on the motion for summary disposition tomorrow afternoon at 2:30 by Zoom. So we have fully briefed that, and we'll argue it tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. And have we heard anything from our lobbyists?
I can get an answer to see if they can provide us a report. So we will remind them of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilperson Watson?
Good evening. I just wanted to say that I'm here for the record. I'm present. I missed the roll call. And I wasn't going to say anything, but Councilmember Babcock jogged my memory about the lobbyists. And I'm curious who receives information from the lobbyists, because I'm wondering, just as staff generates reports for council and various things, if we can internally generate something as opposed to requesting it from our lobbyists. Because somebody sees, you know, someone on our team or on staff does see their information. Thank you.
City Manager, do you have comment?
So you'd like the lobbyists to come in to talk to council, or you'd like to be able to provide?
I'm sorry. What I'm saying is someone receives information from the lobbyists.
Mm-hmm.
And so who are those people within council or East Lansing, City of East Lansing staff? And is it possible that they could generate a report for us on a quarterly basis, as opposed to asking the lobbyist who is doing their job and is communicating with someone to generate that report? Like, would that be easier?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's easier or not, because they're the ones doing the work on behalf of the city, that they're aware of how much time they're spending and what actions they're taking. But when they do have contact, occasionally they have contact with me when there are issues that pop up. For instance, this housing issue that came up, short-term rentals, they check in occasionally and give me a brief update, and then they go back about their business. So I can ask them for, like we said, a quarterly report, and that would be, or we could also have them come in and speak to council as well.
I think, yeah, that question's come up quite a bit all the way through a couple administrations now at this point. I think it's important. We have several items that are directly going to impact East Lansing, obviously around redistricting and overlays. I think this would be a critical time to hear from the lobbyists on our positions. So this would
We
be,
can ask them to come in for a work session.
that'd be great. Mayor Pro Tem Gray?
Thanks. First of all, I want to apologize for being connected to my phone today. I usually make a point of setting my phone aside during council meetings. I'm streaming the agenda on my phone today because I'm having charging problems with my laptop. So sorry about that. I don't want to appear rude. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our University Student Commission. We had our first seating in quite a while of that group. It's one of the commissions we always try to involve students in all of our commissions if applicable. There's certain ones like the DDA where it's just not within the purview of that commission. But the University Student Commission is completely made up of students, and it's really exciting to be in the room with a bunch of young, passionate residents and just hear what they've got on their mind and what they want to work on. So came up today, we received some communication, and you'll see it in the online communication packet from some different agencies involved with menstrual products and security for people who use them. Our sister city, Ann Arbor, just passed an ordinance mandating menstrual supplies in public restrooms, and we've been asked to consider something similar, and it came up almost immediately at the University Student Commission as well. It's deeply on their mind. So I think that's something that we'll probably see at a discussion meeting in the future, which is exciting to tackle. But mostly just wanted to give a shout out to a bunch of passionate residents and my excitement to work with them.
First off, I want to say during this holiday season, obviously shop local and continue to participate with our local businesses and vendors. Second, speaking to the comments of the commenter earlier on the COVID spike, recently spending some time as in Sparrow near the ED, I can say there was 200 people in the emergency department for COVID alone, which I work in healthcare and biotech as well, which is really scary because in other areas of healthcare are being hit hard because it's very difficult to access healthcare based on, just the flood of COVID patients and the amount of bandwidth that it takes for hospitals to deal with those patients. So other things as far as regular screenings, cancer, heart disease, everything else has kind of fallen to the wayside and being overwhelmed. So there's a secondary effect of this second wave and third wave, whatever we're calling it now, and a really scary thing. So there were some really cogent points in there. Continue to, take all the proper steps, continue to vaccinate, and let's all do our part, because the health systems are completely overwhelmed at this point. And if you're questioning the validity of any of this stuff, you can go see it for yourself. And I think most of the, Sparrow, Spectrum, and other systems have released their stats, and you can see the clear distinction between the vaccinated groups and unvaccinated people at this point. I think that's been litigated, and I think that question is a moot question at this point. It's clearly vaccination works from a scientific perspective, so consider it for yourself and for your families. Secondly, I want to comment on the events in Oxford. Very, very sad day, very sad for me, as someone who works with high school students and coaching. Talked to some of my students, and other students at East Lansing staged their own walkout in protest and just looking for more safety and guidance. I think the kids are crying out for us to act. I was talking to some young people, and they're pretty much their impression is adults aren't going to do anything about this. That's what they believe now. We've gone far enough now. You have an entire generation that doesn't believe that adults are going to do anything about this gun issue. It's starting to be baked into the culture, and it was one of the saddest commentaries that I had ever received from a young person. It just broke my heart, and we need to do something. On the question of voting, I did a recent interview around this question on secure Michigan. Clearly, this is just my opinion, and I'll put it like that. This is clearly very sinister action around the areas of voting, and in most ways, it's just sincere power grab. by individuals who have now perhaps lost the majority, see the writing on the wall, are disappointed in the way demographic and other elements have played out, not in their favor, and are now seeking to circumvent democracy, frankly, is the best way you can put it, and there's no way around it. And I just want to reassure the community of East Lansing, our city clerks, our people around voting, the sincere and dedicated efforts to make our voting secure. It's a very serious endeavor here in East Lansing, and just know that every vote is counted, everything is accounted for, and the staff in the clerk's office are highly dedicated to a fair, safe, and secure elections. Just know that this is a straw man that's being thrown around by individuals who want to hold on to power. That's the best way I can put it from that perspective. So to answer the commenter's question, I just firmly denounce any efforts to take the franchise of voting away from individuals who've earned it fairly in a process that's worked for centuries, or if not generations. So thank you for your comments. Last but not least, I'll look for a motion coming here to adjourn to closed session for strategy negotiation session connected to negotiating a collective bargaining agreement at the request of the city pursuant of MCL 15.268. Can I have moved by Councilperson Babcock? Look for a second.
Seconded.
Second by Mayor Pro Tem Craig. Look for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Babcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Brookover,
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg,
Yes.
Mayor Bacon.
Yes. The measure carries unanimously. Up next, City Manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Two items of report. First is to call Director McPherson up to talk about the issue of sewer odors in Chesterfield neighborhood. This is something that council asked for a report on and action. So Nicole McPherson provide that report.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So we did take a further look at the sewer and the catch basins in the Chesterfield area. And as you remember, as part of the Michigan Avenue and Harrison Sewer Improvement Project, we did line the interceptor that goes through that. We lined that in 2019, and then as part of that, we looked back and needed solid covers on that interceptor to be able to control some of those odors. So those were installed in 2020. Now we thought, because the interceptor is the main sanitary carrier through that neighborhood, so we thought that would help with the sewer issues that had been going on in that. But as we looked into this a little bit further, we found that a lot of the catch basins in this area didn't have traps in them. So when you're tapping in a catch basin into a combined sewer, you need traps similar to you have sewer traps in your basement to be able to get sewer traps in your basement, so that the odors don't exit into your house. It's the same thing here, that we prevent the odors from getting out through the catch basin when that catch basin is tied to a combined sewer. So we did a preliminary investigation. We found 19 catch basins that needed traps in them and could not just be easily replaced easily installed, the traps. So we have to replace the entire catch basin. So we're hoping that we can get this started even yet this month, and then we'll be able to move forward with coming back in the spring and doing any other repairs to the roads and stuff like that. We have also improved 6 catch basins that we were able to modify the traps in them to be able to secure them in this area. And we're just going to continue to look through this area. We did focus on the southern section because that's where most of the odor complaints were, and we'll continue to move through this neighborhood as well. Any questions?
Councilperson Babcock?
I'd just like to say thank you. I know that your department is truly, genuinely understaffed. You've got a lot going on, and I really thank you for turning this around so quickly. And it sounds like you've been doing a lot of work on this in addition to everything else. And so anything, I speak for myself, but probably other members of the council, anything we can do to support you as you work on this, I pledge to do. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Director McPherson. One brief item also is to talk about the presentation that's coming up for the fiscal year 2021 annual financial report. So just to mention to council and also to thank staff and the auditors for all their work. This is the culmination of a lot of hours of work to prepare this report. And staff, is basically in a process where they are continually doing something. It's from the audit report, they're going into budgeting, and we'll be in budgeting for the next 6 months. So staff really does work around the year in the finance department to produce all of the great documents and useful information for the community, for council to make decisions. And this is an important part of closing out last year's financials. Not only do they spend a lot of time, they also do an excellent job. The City of East Lansing has received a Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for how many years? Is it 20 years? 36 years. So basically every year, and that is quite an achievement in terms of our financial reporting. So thank you to staff. Jill Felposh is the director, Audrey Kincaid is the assistant director, Justin Geiger as one of our senior accountants, and all the finance staff who put a lot of effort and work into producing this report. I also want to thank Plant Moran, our auditors, for their thoroughness, their work, and their expertise in performing the audit. And with that, we would just move to the presentation, but thank you, Mayor.
City Attorney's report.
Great, thank you, Council. I'll add on to my comments earlier about, I updated you on the Nichols lawsuit with the hearing tomorrow. I did take a moment to look up the Country Mill lawsuit on PACER, which is the federal court docketing system. And again, I don't represent the city in that case, but this is publicly available. After the bench trial at the end of July, there were post-trial briefs. The transcript has been prepared, but this was a bench trial, and it looks like there has been no decision or any other motions or any other action on the case recently. And I have nothing else for my report.
Thank you. All right. Now we'll move on to special presentation, fiscal year 2021 annual comprehensive financial report.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Tonight I'm here to kick off the presentation of the fiscal year 2021 audited financial statement report. Is that better? As you know, we are required to have an annual audit, which reviews not only our financial statements, but also our internal controls and our processes. Before I turn it over to Plant Moran, I would like to echo George's accolades to the finance department. There's a lot of work that goes into this. Audrey Kincaid and Justin Geiger are very important in that process. I'd also like to give special thanks to Heather Pope for the federal award report this year. With CDBG being tested, she's heavily involved as well. The audit went very smoothly. I'm happy to have Plant Moran here to share those results with you. So without further ado, I will present or send over to Alicia Watkins, the partner on the engagement, as well as Tyler Luce, the manager on the engagement.
And you guys can feel to either come up front or from the podium.
Yeah, you know what? We are gonna hang out at the podium if you don't mind, just so that we can see council and mayor. Is it okay if I remove my mask? I'm not totally clear on the protocols, so if I need to leave it on, I will. I'm just gonna be up here for a little while.
It's within 6 feet, so it depends on your comfort or council's comfort, but it's within 6 feet of distance, so people are greater than 6 feet.
Okay.
So it's up to council.
Is council comfortable? I don't want to make anyone else uncomfortable.
I'm okay, but I'd rather hear from the totality.
I'll leave it on. I'll just leave it on. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. If you can't hear me, am I okay? Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, as always, we appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this evening. So thank you for having us. As Jill said, we are going to cover the results of our audit. We're going to cover some financial highlights. But I do also want to extend our appreciation to the finance team for the time and effort spent with our team, to be able to get to this point and get through the audit. As has been said, it's a tremendous amount of work, and we appreciate the cooperation and the effort and really the partnership extended to get here. In terms of the deliverables, and so just a reminder, we do audit both the city's financial statements, and as Jill mentioned, we also perform a separate audit of the federal award expenditures the city has incurred, each year. And so, so there's really the two different audit results or audit opinions that we are issuing. So on the first is the city's financial statement, which is the large packet that you have in front of you. And really, our goal in all this and our responsibility is just to provide an opinion on this document. That all this information is derived by the city, by your team, and we've got like a page and a half, which is our audit opinion. And it tells council, it tells the users of your financial statements that your report can be relied upon, that it follows all the rules and regulations, and that is what you should expect. So we call that an unmodified opinion, meaning that the opinion on your financial statements that we have given is without exception. So that's excellent. In addition to giving an opinion on the accuracy and compliance of your financial statements, for each of our audits, we also consider whether or not there are any deficiencies and controls or other things in place. And happy to report that for the financial statement audit, we did not identify any control issues or deficiencies that rose to the level of being reportable. So that's always excellent. And it's hard to achieve. It's been fairly common for the city of East Lansing, but it's not necessarily a common audit result in general. So well done there. The other document I mentioned is the federal awards report. So there's I think it's a bound report for you, mine's just stapled, that says federal awards supplemental information. That's the report for it's called a single audit or the audit on the federal awards. And again, we were able to issue an unmodified opinion. Similarly, it tells the users, it tells council management that your team is complying with the rules and regulations, the financial numbers are the way that they should on the CFA, and all things good. Likewise, we do also have to consider the control side, as I mentioned on the financial statements. And if you go to page 9, this is easier to show you. We have this kind of interesting format here. On page 9 of that federal awards report, this is sort of the overview of the results because we have to look at it several different ways. And actually it summarizes the financial statement results as well. So if we start at the top, we can see what I just covered on the financial statements, unmodified and no exceptions on the internal controls over the financial statements. If you go down a little bit, maybe middle of the page, the sort of summary results for the federal awards, there was no material weaknesses, but we did identify a control item that did rise to the level of having to report it in this federal awards document. And so that is shown on the next page. And really what it just comes down to is there's one page in here that summarizes all the numbers. Frankly, it's like your financial report for your single audit. That gets filed with the federal government, and similar to a financial statement, if we identify an error in the numbers that would get filed with the reporting agency, then we just have to share that and we have to include it in the report. And so that occurred this year. I do want to clarify that we tried to put the proper context in here. The federal expenditures as reported were accurately stated. It was some of the supplemental information on amounts passed through the other entities that were misstated by about $94,000. So we've already talked to your team, and the controls and such over that have been rectified and wouldn't be expected to recur going forward. But those are kind of the high-level results. Before we dive into the graph package, I just wanted to share just a couple of highlights on the financials from 2021. And I will point out in that large financial statement, right, there's just so much in there, it can be overwhelming. Pages 3 through 18 is the management discussion and analysis. And that is the part of the financial statements that your finance team prepares as an overview, right? The average person is going to make it through that full document. So it provides an overview to the reader, to the users of financials, of what really happened, what the highlights were, what to expect going forward, how you did compare to budget results. So it's a great read, and it's a lot of information in a condensed format. So I just point that out to you, but a couple things I'll mention. So one, thinking about the general fund, of course, that's sort of your operating fund and where the primary activity of the city is reported. And so the general fund did outperform your budget by $1.2 million. That result, despite having revenue that came in under budget. So really great job there with cost management, cost containment, and being able to get to a favorable result compared to your budget. When Tyler walks through the graph package, you will see in your enterprise fund, so now if we think about like water, sewer, parking, where there's kind of a fee for service, those funds are also good financial health, appropriately setting rates to cover the costs of the enterprises. So doing well there overall. If we think of the city in aggregate, kind of pulling everything together, and we also think of a longer term perspective. So we just talked about the general fund current year results or the current year results of the enterprise, but there's also that broad perspective. How are we doing overall? The city really has improved your pension funding for 3 years in a row. And if you think about your retiree healthcare funding, that trend is, been in place for many years, well over 3 years. And you'll see that in the graph package too. So continuing to make progress on your plan to improve the funding status in both of those areas, which is tremendous. Another thing that happened several years ago when those liabilities came onto the balance sheet, they used to just be in the footnotes, is most municipalities sort of became upside down, if you will, in terms of the financial position. So if you think of, like if you liken it to our homes, for example, like you talk about being upside down in your home, right? That means that your liability, your mortgage on your house might be more than the value. We saw that happen, many years ago. Well, when those significant liabilities came onto our municipalities' books, most went into a negative equity position, negative net position. And the city was no exception. What's happened this year is you've sort of turned the corner where you're now seeing an overall positive net position. Hard to do when you have millions of dollars in these legacy costs on your books, but it's a good indication because what it tells you as council, what it tells the community, what it tells the readers, that you're sort of chipping away at reducing the future costs for current services, right? So when your liabilities exceed your assets, it means that some of those costs are being pushed to future generations and you're not sort of covering today's costs with today's revenue. Well, as you start to flip that around and you have a positive equity or positive net position, you're getting more back in line with covering your costs as they incur and reducing these legacy costs. And so you're absolutely trending in the right direction, and we'll be able to see that with some of the numbers here in this slide deck just in a few minutes. Of course, another really significant item that happened this year was the allocation of the ARPA funds of just over $12 million, as you're all aware. And now what we have here in November is the Infrastructure Act having been signed in place. So that one is going to work a little bit differently. So we know with ARPA, there was just these general allocations. Funds, half of those funds have already showed up in folks' bank accounts. You'll get the rest in 2022. There's a lot of information we don't have yet, but what we do know is the infrastructure dollars are not just going to be made available. A lot of them will be funneled through the states. We expect dollars to be available through existing grant programs, some application processes. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. We're all kind of wading through what's it going to look like to get access to those funds. But certainly there's tremendous opportunity with, the new dollars that are available for infrastructure. So, as we think about what happened in 2021 and start looking ahead, it's really kind of considering what's the city's strategy around, some of these dollars that have come in. We all know it's sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity, and really how do we optimize those for the community, for the city, and kind of getting your plan in place. You do have several years, as you're aware, and so I wouldn't say it's a rush, but that's sort of what's on everyone's mind as we look ahead. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tyler to cover the graphs, and then I'll wrap up briefly with the final letter in your packet.
Good evening, City Council. I must say that it is good to be back in person, despite the masks and all the standard protocols that we need to follow. So thank you. As Alicia mentioned, I am going to walk us through a graph package here that is being displayed. As a reminder, this is information that we deem useful as users of the financial statements, as well as your role as City Council members. These amounts are coming from the large bound document from the city's financials, but it will be summarizing specifically the general fund results, as well as the legacy costs, and then the enterprise funds as well. So on the next slide, I just wanted to highlight what the amounts that specifically to the general fund on the next following slides is going to include both the seniors fund as well as the income tax fund. So for reporting purposes, both of those funds are included within the amounts on the next slides that I will be presenting here. So on the next slide, we have the general fund revenues. So what this slide is doing is really breaking out the various types of revenues within the general fund. One item that I did want to highlight that the greatest revenue sources for fiscal year 2021 would be property taxes at 13.9 million and income taxes at 12.1 million, with each of these making up over 25% of the total general fund revenue. Intergovernmental revenue also increased approximately 2.9 million, with the primary cause of this increase relating to grant funding that was received to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. One other item that I did want to highlight here is the decrease in property tax revenue when you look to 2019 and earlier. And as a reminder, this is just due to the decrease due to the passing of the income tax legislation, which limited the general operating tax levy to 13 mills. And with that, if we switch over to the next slide, we will have general fund expenditures. So shown on this slide, again, is the makeup of general fund expenditures. The most notable change this year is an increase in the general government, which was about $3.6 million, which most of it relates to additional supplemental pension payments, which was using the income tax allocated dollars and applying that towards supplemental payments. So majority of the increase, the supplemental payment last year was, I believe, 2.1 million, so it was about a $2.6 million increase there. Another item I did want to highlight on this slide is the makeup of the expenditures. So you'll see here that public safety expenditures make up approximately 61% of total general fund expenditures, excluding transfers out, which is not only consistent with prior years, but it would also be consistent with other local municipalities as well in terms of general fund expenditures. The rest of the expenditure categories on this slide are very consistent with prior years, which, as Alicia mentioned, really speaks to the fact that the city is able to maintain current levels of service despite the pandemic and also manage these costs within budgeted amounts. On the next slide, we have a breakout of comparing revenue and transfers or inflows to expenditures and transfers out or outflows of the general fund. So what this really shows is the makeup of both expenditures as compared to the revenue coming in. And then the other trend line that's being shown here is the accumulation of fund balance, which really did start in fiscal year 2018. However, these funds, as I'm going to mention on the next slide, are not really restricted in the sense that they're able to be used for any expenditure, but we'll cover that shortly on the next slide here. So this slide represents the general fund balance by component. So this is the fund balance components within the general fund. The dark blue segment here represents the funds that are legally restricted for the income tax fund allocation. The dark blue, it did decrease compared to fiscal year 2020, and that was really due to the city allocating the income tax revenue in the current year. The lighter blue bar represents the unassigned fund balance, which really can be leveraged in times of need. The city, as a reminder, the city does have a minimum target fund balance policy, which is 8 to 15% of current operating budget for the general fund. And just for comparison purposes, the unassigned amount, which would be $6.2 million this year, as a percent of the total amended budget for the general fund expenditures would be 16.5%. So what that really means is the city is not only within the fund balance target policies, but it really is ensuring that there would be resources available for unexpected events such as a pandemic or any situation where there's a lot of unknown factors. So with that, this segment kind of captures the general fund amount. So I just want to pause and see if there's any questions. absolutely.
And most of them are probably stupid, so, I just, as you were going through that quickly, I just had a couple of questions in terms of these graphs. And so specifically on your general fund expenditures graph, could you slowly go through that again and make your points?
Yes, absolutely. So if we could go, okay, perfect. We are back to the general fund expenditures. So this slide is showing the buckets of the general fund expenditures, and then the most significant increase that I did want to highlight, so this would be year-over-year changes, would be the increase in general government expenditures, which the increase was about 3.6 million from last year. And majority of that relates to, there was a supplemental pension payment in the current year, which was approximately 5.1 million. And this is an increase of approximately 2.6 million from last year.
Okay,
So
let me just stop you right there.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think what you're talking about is what I consider the second column from the left.
Correct.
And you're talking about the differential between 7,666 and 11,241?
Correct.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, but then I don't understand what you're talking about in terms, I think what you're telling us is that we made an additional payment to pay down the pension liability, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, I don't understand what you're saying in terms of the numbers, in terms of that differential. So are you saying all of that 3.6 million is us paying down the pension, and that's the differential between those two figures?
No,
Okay. So what are you saying?
Yes, so the supplemental pension payment in the current year was approximately $5.1 million.
Okay, now that is on top of
The required payments.
Well, we have a required payment.
Correct.
And then we have a payment under the what I call the 60% rule under the ballot proposal, correct? Correct?
The allocation for the additional amount, the supplemental payment, would be a result of the income tax ballot proposal.
Okay, and only the income tax ballot proposal.
I would defer to Jill on that
And Ms. Felposh, I want to compliment you on your big, long report. It's just, in my experience, just one of the best reports I've seen for a public body, and you just did a great job.
Thank you. So, yes, the income tax is the 60% allocation. This, for fiscal year 2021, 5.1 million came from income tax.
Okay.
2.5 million came from the general fund. So
Okay.
we actually made supplemental pension payments of 7.6 million, with it broken out 5.1 income tax, 2.5 general.
And that's actually on top of what the state requires us
Correct.
to pay, correct?
Correct.
And can you give us that number off the top of
It's
your head?
approximately $10.5 million.
Okay, so in total, we have 10.5 million, plus the money from the income tax, allocated at 60% under the ballot proposal, and then we made an additional payment beyond that, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so now, sir, back to what you're talking about, these numbers, are all of those components, other than the required payment to the state, the dunning from the state is what I call it, are all of those payments reflected in this differential between the 7.6 and the 11.2, or only part of them?
The primary increase is the supplemental payment of the 5.1 specific that came from the income tax.
Okay.
Last year, that payment would have been 2.1. So the differential between what the supplemental payment was last year and the supplemental payment this year is making up the primary increase of the general
Okay.
the general government
Okay, so
expenditures.
now, where I'm trying to figure this out is,
Absolutely.
so I understand the point is we spent more money out of in this general government category. What I want to now know is this additional payment that Ms. Felposh told us about over and above, is that in this column or not?
So this would just be general fund specific. It wouldn't include any additional payments that were paid by, say, the enterprise funds or other funds within the county's.
Yeah, you're kind of losing me here, so Jill, maybe you can answer that.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
where does that extra money that we threw into the hopper, where does that come from?
The 2.5 million that came from the general fund is under public safety, because we are allocating those amounts to police and fire divisions.
Oh, to their pensions?
Yes.
Okay, so now are they reflected in the 25,706? in
That
this column?
$2.5 million is reflected in the 25.7 million.
Okay, so then what I'm asking, and then Mayor, I'll shut up, okay? But can you all explain to us why there's this decrease of from 26,244 to 25,706? And just so I understand that, we're talking millions there, right?
Yes.
That's millions. Okay,
Yes,
all right.
that is primarily because in fiscal year 20, just gotta verify my number. In fiscal year 20, we contributed 3.1 million out of the general fund to public safety divisions.
On top of. what
Yes,
I'm
that
saying is on
supplemental
top.
amount was 3.1. In fiscal year 21, it dropped down to 2.5.
Okay.
So we did an additional on top of the budgeted amount in fiscal year 20.
And just so that we all understand, when we're talking about 2021, we're talking about fiscal year 2021, which is from when to when?
July 1 of 2020 to June 30 of 21.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, I'm sorry to put you through all that.
No, absolutely. And we do have a section upcoming here that would be devoted to legacy costs. And I think that'll kind of capture a lot of the comments and the questions that you were asking. So thank you. Are there any other questions on the general fund amounts?
Well, I have some other questions on the big report, but I think we can save those until later. So.
Okay, absolutely. So I believe then we are on slide 7, which is going to be covering the legacy costs. So I did want to start with this slide. So it does incorporate what the costs that are going to be included in terms of annual costs. So for pension, the normal costs are costs attributable for both the current reporting period and then the unfunded actuarial valuation. So you do hire a third party to perform a valuation, and a portion of those costs are going to be included within the actual costs as well. And it could also include, as we've discussed, the supplemental funding payments as well. In terms of retiree healthcare, so this would be your OPEB amounts, the normal cost would be costs attributable to the current reporting period. However, the distinguishing factor is it would not be for prior service periods, but it would also include supplemental funding as well.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just so we all know, can you tell us what the acronym stands for, please?
For OPEB?
Yeah.
Yes, it would be the other post-employment benefits.
Okay. So that's healthcare and things like that?
Absolutely. So it would be synonymous. If you use the term retiree healthcare, it would be the same thing.
Thank you.
So on the next slide, we do have the pension actuarially determined contribution versus the actual contributions. And this ties in exactly with the questions that we did cover. So as over the past 7 years, the city has taken steps to increase the funding level of the pension plan by contributing more than that actuarially determined contribution or the required contribution. So in 2021, nearly 7.6 million was contributed in excess of the required contribution, which primarily was a result of the income tax allocation. And then on the next slide, we have a comparison of the total pension liability, the total plan assets, and then if you were to take the difference between those two amounts, that would result in the ending net pension liability. So the total pension liability, as you can see here, has increased, but plan assets have also increased significantly in fiscal year 2021, which is highlighted in this graph, with 2021 ending at being 56.33% funded based on the most recent actuarial evaluation. So one thing I did want to highlight with this slide is that the pension liability can still go up due to changes in investment returns, market assumptions, and then changes also in the actuarial assumptions. These are really outside of the city's control, but the city does continue to make up some ground on funding these liabilities, which is important. On the next slide, we will switch over to the retiree healthcare. So a very similar set of slides that I'm going to cover. So the actual contribution here does represent the pay-as-you-go costs. So these are costs as they're incurred for retirees and these would be healthcare-related costs. So while the city is devoting less resources to the retiree healthcare legacy costs, it does continue to make additional supplemental payments of $100,000 over the past few years. On the next slide, similar to what we had for the pension, in contrast to the pension liability, though, I did want to highlight that the OPEB liability in total and in net, so the net OPEB liability, does continue to decrease year over year, while the plan assets are still increasing through the city's contributions. The funding percentages are located at the top of the graph, and you can see here that there's a very positive increase from 30.84% funded in fiscal year 2018, and that would be shown on the far left graph. And then if you compare that to fiscal year 2021, which would be 48% funded. And really the reason that the city has been able to grow the funding percentage is because they're able to use other resources outside of the OPEB trust to fund current year benefits instead of paying from the OPEB plan directly. So the assets are continuing to grow, and the city is able to allocate other resources to fund current costs. In addition, the actuaries' assumptions used for the valuation are being updated, and they're being more consistent with the city's effort to drive healthcare costs down. So positive experience there as compared to the actual assumptions for pension, which seem to be trending in the other direction. And then before I move over to the enterprise funds, I did want to stop here and see if there were any questions on the legacy costs.
I do have one more question.
Absolutely.
So I realize that Plant Moran does a lot of this for a lot of different municipalities and school districts. Can you give us some idea of how our unfunded pension and OPEB balances compare to similar sized municipalities?
Absolutely. And I'll allow Alicia to jump in, but I would say from experience, there are certainly cities of similar size that have 100% funded, and that would be for pension, so that could be common. And then there are other cities that would be a lot less funded. So I would say that the city is in good hands there in terms of OPEB, and certainly I'll allow Alicia to comment as well. And then in terms of OPEB, it does widely differ as well. I would say that at this funding percentage, though, you would be towards the top end of the spectrum.
I sort of got the impression it was Alicia that was allowing you to have the podium for a while rather than you allowing her. But is there just...
You know how this works, right?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
You know, if I could add a couple comments.
Well, hang on, let me just ask one more question. So for the public, because I'm really doing this for the public as much as for us, so is there some site, state site, or easily obtainable site that will show these comparisons to different municipalities? I mean, I've seen diagrams or graphs at other points in time, but is there some site where we can all go and look at those things compared to populations and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the state has been compiling and has, I'm sorry. So the state has been compiling all this information, particularly in recent years with Public Act 202. I haven't seen them put all municipalities like in one spreadsheet or one area where you can compare, but certainly if you said, I want to know how neighboring communities are doing, you can go out there and pull their financial dashboard information. All the financial statements are public record. Those are available on Treasury's website too at the state of Michigan. So the information is definitely available by municipality. I have not yet seen it in a format where it pulls all communities into one report or one database that you can, but it is accessible. But can I go back to your first question before we move on? Because I feel like you might have another question coming.
What was my first question?
Your first question was about providing some context, and Tyler had shared some comments, and I wanted to just expand on that a little bit. So I do agree 100% on the OPEB funding. You would be just about best in class there. I mean, the state is looking for folks to get to 40% over the next 30 years. I mean, you're already above that, right? So that there's some context there. We have communities that just started funding in the last couple of years that are, at less than 10% funded. So real good. What I would add on the pension side is, I think for the general systems, the struggle that you're experiencing is very common, right? You're making your contribution year over year, you're doing what your actuary recommends, but your liability keeps going up. People are living longer, the experience is changing, the returns, the rate of returns and the discounts are lower than what actuaries predicted years ago. So that's very common. Where we do see funds with stronger funding positions is where there's like a dedicated millage, which the city doesn't have. So many communities in Michigan have like a dedicated millage, for example, for police and fire. That's where the funds are specifically available, and those plans are generally a lot better funded. But the general plans that are sort of funded the way that you are and that are with like a MERS or an other, just like a general system, not a dedicated millage, the funding percentage in some instances is a little bit higher, so we might see 60, 70%. The state is looking for folks to get to 60%, so there's perspective there over the next 30 years on the pension side. But the challenge overall with that funding experience is similar for the general plans, I would say.
So you were talking about actuarial estimates, and so are these actuarial, let's just talk about the pension side of this issue, okay? So the actuarial estimates, are those imposed, for want of a better word, by the state?
Yes, sort of, for Public Act 202. So for the corrective action plan that the city has to follow for your pension funding, they do provide their own assumptions.
And they change that discount rate yearly?
They've changed it a couple times, not necessarily yearly, but they do revisit, and they have changed some of the assumptions.
So is it correct that like a 1% change in the discount rate can mean millions of dollars to the city of East Lansing?
Yeah.
So in other words, if they, not that I understand discount rates, but
Right.
I'm sure the mayor is invested more in the stock market than I am, but the reality is, when they change that measurement, that can mean a heck of a lot in terms of what they impose or don't impose upon us.
Yeah, when those change, the state doesn't set the rate, the assumptions that are used for GAAP,
Yeah.
so there's a different set of assumptions, and those are driven by actuarial experience and investment advisors who are watching the market and kind of all these things, right? What's happening with membership in the plan and mortality, and so it's all these things. But certainly, that discount rate, the investment rate of return, is one of the more significant assumptions, and you're right, 0.5% or 1% could swing millions and millions of dollars.
And so you were talking about earlier about the actuary that I assume is an actuary that's looking at the city of East Lansing, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and
Yeah.
that's something that's part and parcel of this process.
It is. It's a combination, I would say, of actual plan experience, because that can vary by community or by plan depending on the type of plan or the composition of the membership. But then there's also some general assumptions that are more market driven and things like that.
Okay, and then finally, it's not in this book, I think it's in the other book, but so it would appear from, that the state puts us in what I think you guys made a red category or whatever. So what's the percentage of funding that we need to hit to be acceptable in the state's eyes?
They're looking for you to get to 60% on your pension
Okay,
plan.
and standing here tonight, based on this report, where are we?
56.
Oh, yeah.
56, I think your numbers, the prior slide showed 56.4.
56.3, I think Tyler said.
Okay, and last year, do you know what we were?
Can you go back to the slide?
It's jumped up a little bit, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
There you go.
That's it right there. That's my report.
52, 56, yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes.
May I?
I think there's another question, Councilman.
You guys can proceed. if you-
Okay. I think Councilmember had a question, Babcock.
Councilperson Babcock.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to make Mr. Brookover look like a math genius with my questions. Not that he isn't, but I'm certainly not. So we've got the gap, and how many years do you estimate it will take for us, for the city of East Lansing, to be able to get to a 60% gap?
So you're almost there. You're really close. I don't remember the number of years. Jill, do you remember what your plan show, like your Public Act 202 plan, you know, and while you're pulling it up, it's going to depend in part. So you would have had to put together a plan that said, here's our plan, here's where we think we're going to get to 60%, and Joe can speak to that. But there's also a lot of variables. So you're at 56% funding now, but next year, you know, it could do a nosedive because another assumption changes, the market doesn't perform well, you know, and things like that. So you're really close, but, you know, I think it's going to be a little bit volatile over the next several years. And if you want to speak to your plan.
Yep, the corrective action plan that we put in place when we first were underfunded or considered underfunded, I think it called for us to be above the 60% by fiscal year 25 or fiscal year 26. Okay. And that was based on prior to the income tax actually being in place, but it's already been passed, right? So we had MERS at that time do estimates, ballpark estimates is what they call it. Of course, they're using current valuation estimates or current valuation assumptions. And so that led us to believe that we could be at 60% by fiscal year 25 or 26. I can't remember exactly which year it is. So that's how we came up with that year. That was our plan and our goal to reach.
Is this, pardon my ignorance, is this ever expected to be fully funded? I mean, are pension plans expected to be fully funded?
Yes, MERS has changed their requirements. They used to always have a 30-year or slightly less, depending on if it's an open plan or a closed plan. So you had an amortization period, and it was kind of a rolling amortization period as long as the plan was open. So it kind of always gave you that relief, maybe is the right word. And now they're saying that you must be fully funded by a certain point in time. And I believe ours is 2041 or 2042. Again, I can't remember the exact year. And based on our most recent ballpark estimates from MERS, we will meet that.
Any idea when we'll reach fully funded? I mean, again, I know it's largely in flux.
If I could quickly, so the ballpark estimate actually called for 10 years from now for the city to be fully funded. So we would expect all things, there's lots of variables as was mentioned, so it's hard to say, but the ballpark estimate shows by, I believe, 2032 being near 100% funded. So that would be our goal, but I think that, you know, there's going to be some wiggle room in that. But obviously, I think that that's probably the best estimate we have at this point is the ballpark estimate from MERS, which shows 10 years from now, which closely coincides with the income tax for a dozen-year period income tax to get to largely being fully funded was the goal.
And just to add, I'm sorry, just to add to that, the ballpark estimates used an assumption that we would be making around $15.5 million a year. So remember, we're at around 10.5 of required. That means we're going to have about $5 million of supplemental pension payments. Okay. This past year, we contributed $7.6 million, right? This year, we're expecting to be around $5.5 million. So we did have a bump in fiscal year 21 on our supplemental pension payments because the first year of income tax, I was very cautious and reserved in how much I was going to send in that first year when I didn't really know what the results were going to be. So we had some of that carryover, which is really what bumped it up to that $7.6 million in fiscal year 21. I don't expect that we're going to sustain that in fiscal year 22, but as the income tax grows, we should be able to see some growth in our supplemental pension payments.
Okay, thank you. This is not my native turf. So I appreciate your patience and your explanations.
This is not easy stuff.
It's hard. Yeah, you can give me a quiz on like something that would be appropriate for English majors. I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Director Felposh, was that assumption of 2041, 42 in consideration of the income tax or prior to the income tax being
That
in
was
place?
prior to the income tax and kind of what the impetus was for our financial health team, knowing that we had this legacy debt that we were going to have to pay. So prior to those conversations, MERS had given us, like, here's how your required contributions are going to grow, and we were getting up into, say, $20 million of a required contribution instead of a $7, $8, $9 million required contribution, which wasn't a feasible, way to do business, I suppose.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just one of the things that Tyler and I were just kind of sharing notes on in the back here is relative to the question about the sensitivities, we just thought we'd point out to council might be helpful. On page 66 of the large packet, it shows exactly what you were asking about, which is what really that 1% swing can do in terms of, 1% could go $20 million one way. So very significant, but just wanted to point out that information is also available in your packet. And, if I just could, when I think about kind of what's the takeaway from all this conversation that we've been having around OPEB and pension, the funding status, the supplemental payments, the city put a plan in place and it's working. You're moving in the right direction. You're showing progress year over year. So hopefully the takeaway is to stick with it, stick with your plan. And, it seems that you're really on track to reach your goals, which is tremendous, and maybe even be ahead of them. So that's a takeaway for me when I look at how you're trending and sort of the results of the plan that you're working through now. You want to wrap up? Sure.
All right, and then that leads us to our last section, which would be related to the enterprise funds. So on the next slide, slide 12. So the enterprise funds in this case would include both the sewage, water, and the parking funds. So there are some questions to consider here, but I did want to just highlight in general, the enterprise funds operate very similar to what you would find in the private sector, where there is a fee charged, and there's a fee charged to external customers in return for a service or a product. So very similar if you were to compare it to another business. So on slide 13, what this is showing for each of the enterprise funds is comparing total operating revenue for each of the enterprise funds and comparing it, or attempting to compare it, to operating expenses as well as debt service, current year debt service, and then capital outlay costs. So you will notice here that for both the sewage disposal fund and the water system fund, the revenues were in excess of existing operating and capital needs. But this was actually part of the city's plan to set aside resources for significant capital needs in the future. So if you were to take a very narrow focus, you would say, okay, well, the operating revenue is exceeding the current year expenditures. However, this was planned for and budgeted in order to put money back into the systems and improve upon those systems in terms of capital outlay. And then lastly, I did want to highlight the parking fund. So this year, the expenses and debt service did exceed operating revenue. However, this was due to a decrease due to the pandemic on parking fee revenue. And I know the city made a concerted effort to provide relief for a lot of individuals and reduce the parking fees. So this year, that would be the other way than when we would have compared it to prior years. So with that, that wraps up our enterprise funds analysis. Just want to open it up for questions before I turn it over to Alicia to cover our final deliverable, which is the end of audit letter. Okay. Thank you.
All right. I am not going to belabor this last letter. We've been here for a while, but it is required communication. And I think it would have been at the bottom of the packet that we set in front of you. And it's got like section 1, section 2, and kind of gets into some commentary. We're required to issue these after all of our audits, and our professional standards set forth sort of all these different areas in which we have to communicate and report out on. And so, many of you have seen this before. It's very similar. There's not a lot new other than informing, council that there was a new accounting standard that was adopted, not the most exciting stuff. And then on page 3, it just talks about the significant estimates included in your financial statements, as well as a couple of, financial statement corrections that were passed on, I would say, that we do have to tell you about. So a couple things technically weren't right. They both involve the retirement systems, and we agreed with your team that we didn't think that they were a material misstatement by not modifying them in the book that you have in front of you, but we just do have a requirement to include them in our letter. Everything else, which is mostly there starting on page 5 in section 2, it's just informational on whether it's new standards, legislative items, things your teams are working through on the finance side, and we just make that available for your reference, but weren't intending to spend time on it this evening. Were there any questions as you went through the letter in advance that you wanted to touch on, that since I just breezed through it so quickly? All right, that wraps up our presentation. Thank you all. We appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. On to the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor. We have the following items on the consent agenda for council's consideration. Item 4.1, approve the following appointments or reappointments to boards or commissions. 1, Austin Pabian to the Arts Commission for a full term ending December 31st, 2024. Number 2, Oluwatobi Williams to the Arts Commission for a full term ending December 31st, 2024. 3, Gabrielle Kindig to the Arts Commission for a full term ending December 31st, 2024. 4, Crystal Davis Dunn to the Human Rights Commission for a full term ending December 31st, 2024. 5, Karen Honey to the Human Rights Commission for a full term ending December 31st, 2024. 6, Mike Emanuel to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission for a partial term ending December 31st, 2022. 7, Sarah Reckhow to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission for a full term ending December 31st, 2024. 8, Joshua Smith to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a full term ending December 31st, 2024. 9, Adam DeLay to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission for a full term ending December 31st, 2024. Item 4.2, approve a contract with Tetra Tech for a third-party review of the August 12th, 2021 rain event. Item 4.3, approve the use of the contingency funds for the fiscal year 2021 SRF Clarifier and Aeration Improvements Project by Granger Construction Company for work change directives and change orders generated during the construction, and authorize the city manager to sign. Those are all the items on the consent agenda for council's consideration.
For a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll move approval of the consent agenda.
Moved by Mayor Pro Temp Gregg,
I'll second.
second by Councilperson Watson. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Carries unanimously. Next, we'll be moving into the closed session period here. We'll only be returning back to the chamber to adjourn the meeting. So from this point forward, we'll be leaving the chamber for the closed session. I think we're all set. Meeting adjourned. Right? Or do we have to come out of?
Motion to resume.
Let's do it from closed session.
All right, I'll be looking for a motion to come out of close to resume
I
regular
will
session.
so move. Or I guess I'll second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Gregg, second by Councilperson Babcock. We have to roll call vote back in. Roll call vote?
Councilmember Babcock,
Yes.
Councilmember Brookover,
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg,
Yes.
Mayor Bacon.
Yes. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.